if there was a course on how not to be a leader in a country, Robert Mugabe is a classical example of how not to lead and how to destroy Africa. Robert Mugabe has presided over a country, the only country in the world which has no currency. The Zimbabweans sometimes use the pula of Botswana, sometimes they use the yuan of China, sometimes they use the rand of South Africa, sometimes they use the American dollar. And yet Robert Gabriel Mugabe refuses to go. But that will never be said to Robert Mugabe at a meeting of the African Union. They'll never tell him that. Because at that meeting we are too nice to each other, and we have been too nice to each other in Africa for too long, with the consequence that we are now paying the price. So going forward, what must we do? Having recognized that leadership is our problem, we must define for ourselves who is a leader. Those of you who are present here, some of you may be in positions of leadership. Some of you may be aspiring to positions of leadership in the political arena. But the question is, why do you want to lead? In Africa, the shortest route to ill-gotten wealth is political leadership. If you want to get wealth without working for it at all, join African politics. That is the truth everywhere in Africa except for very few places. The only place that stands out now in that regard is Tanzania with President John Pombe Magufuli. The rest in Africa, I do not know. Excuse me, I'm a visitor. But when I was a student, I was told that in our tradition we had this thing called hunters and gatherers. That instinct is still alive and well in our political leaders. They hunt and gather buildings and cars and money. And that is why African leadership does not attract our best men and women. And African electorate also responds to money. I do not know whether it happens here in Africa, in Ghana. The African electorate also expects to be bribed so that they can vote. And until the day we are able to exercise the ghost of ethnicity, among other things, and the ghost of corruption in Africa, Africa will never get good leaders. Let me, as I conclude, just remind you of two things. Not so long ago, news emerged that some papers had been exposed called the Panama Papers. And a number of African leaders and business people are named there. I have no problem with business people. It is their business to engage in business. There was also the case of the Prime Minister of Iceland. And he was mentioned, and it was said that his wife had kept some money in Panama. The following day, over 20% of the Icelandic population were in the streets in the capital of Iceland, in Reykjavik, demanding that he leaves office. And the following day, he left. During that same week, in South Africa, the public protector made a finding that their president had used some money to improve his rural home, including the construction of a cattle kraal and a swimming pool which they said was for firefighting. And the people of South Africa requested their president to leave, but he merely apologized. You can see the different cultures. Recently, the second example is in the United Kingdom. Their young prime minister, only age 50, called for a referendum as to whether the United Kingdom should leave Europe or not, and he lost the vote. And he took the decision that having lost the vote, there is no wisdom, political or otherwise, to continue to remain in office. And he resigned as the prime minister, and a few months later resigned as the member of parliament. I now want you to imagine for a moment that the prime minister was the prime minister of Ghana. First of all, he would have said that that vote was rigged. And he would have said that his seat was never on the line. And that there is no reason why he should leave. And that there is every reason why he should dig in. Because it is him or her, particularly the hymns, who know what is in the best interest of Ghana. And Ghana is a metaphor. It could be Kenya, it could be Uganda, it could be Tanzania, it could be any African country. In other words, I'm saying that one of the things that we must do is to change our political culture. And political culture requires, among other things, that we must know that in the modern democratic dispensation, leadership is about governance and about servant leadership. Africa must recognize that if Africa is to survive. The African electorate must also be educated. But one of the things that worries me, it appears that formal education, this education where we get degrees, does not appear to help. We need another kind of education. We need a kind of education that changes our minds and hearts. A kind of education that revolutionizes our minds and hearts. It is only that other kind of education that is going to change us. And that kind of education is the kind of education that I think Kwame Nkrumah was talking about. If you listen to Kwame Nkrumah quite clearly, if you listen to him quite clearly, you Ghanaians and fellow Africans, and I have carefully read Kwame Nkrumah and his numerous speeches, it is amazing that as early as 1960s, he had the wisdom to see that science and technology was at the very heart of human development. And he founded the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Today I'm told that half of the graduates there graduate in humanities. You lost the script, so that the university is in danger of becoming a university of science and technology simply because it is its name. You know, I remember at one of my discussions when we were at the university, a friend of mine who had failed to get his doctorate for a long time was in a quarrel with a professor, and professor told him, "You will never be a doctor unless you go and get another Christian name called doctor." So there is a danger that we have that. But I was talking about education. If you look at the idea of Kwame Nkrumah at that time, when he was talking about the University of Ghana at Legon, what kind of education was he talking about? When he was talking about the creation of the University of Cape Coast, what kind of education was he talking about? When he was talking about nuclear energy in 1960s, Kwame Nkrumah was talking about nuclear energy. In 1960s, Kwame Nkrumah was talking about the Akosombo Dam and the Tema Port and Takoradi. He was seeing all these things. (1957 to 1966), Only 9 years. You imagine, because I believe Kwame Nkrumah would not have died in 1972. Had he remained the president, he would not have died. And you imagine that he had presided over this country for 15 years. You imagine, just imagine to yourself with the kind of ideas that he had. And if he was presiding, he was also, because Nkrumah was contagious. He was afflicting other African leaders with different ideas. What was happening in Ghana would have happened in Guinea. What was happening in Guinea would have happened in Senegal. It would have happened across Africa, and African politics would be totally different. These little 54 countries, which are not viable anyway, would simply have been states in a united Africa. Intra-African trade would be something else. We'll talk about that at a different stage. But what is important is that Kwame Nkrumah was clear, and I'm submitting to you, my fellow Africans, that until the day we have a political reawakening, Africa will never occupy her rightful place.